Hello, and welcome to the People Strategy Forum. The world today needs more women in leadership, not just surviving it, but thriving in it. So, what does it take to lead influence in this ever evolving workplace? We're going to find out today with Shauna Moran, an award winning executive coach, author, and founder. Shauna's mission is helping leaders, especially women, develop emotional intelligence, resilience, and strategic clarity to thrive in a fast paced, complex environment that we see our world in today. Through her coaching and research, she's uncovered what's truly setting female leaders apart: the ability to balance high performance with authenticity, empathy, and presence. So, you're for a woman in leadership or leading women, you will want to walk away from this conversation with some practical tools to boldly communicate more clearly with your people, to be an advocate in the workplace. So, let's welcome Shauna Moran. Welcome, Shauna.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Yes. I understand that you are broadcasting from a very beautiful place today. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, indeed. I am joining from the beautiful Bowen Island off the coast of British Columbia in Canada. Lovely views surrounded by the ocean and the trees. Very blessed.
I can appreciate that too. I'm a lover of nature and I like to see those views as well. Shauna, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you started building a career around helping leaders adapt to change. What was inspired you to focus on women in leadership?
Yeah, it really was a series of events and a real journey. There wasn't any one particular moment that led me to where I am. Sometimes you're collecting all the pieces of the jigsaw and then it comes together. It really started for me as a woman in leadership, as someone that was ambitious, taking on more responsibility, getting promoted, seeking that growth, seeking excellence in leadership, wanting to make that impact. Oftentimes been very challenged around that in my own leadership journey. The different cultural aspects, leadership aspects, personal aspects of it as well, of course. It really was such a learning journey for me, and oftentimes that was a very isolating journey. And it was a journey that I was trying to figure out on my own. I didn't have a community of other women leaders that I could lean on. I struggled to know where to go in confidence with certain things. For my own personal journey, I experienced burnout within my work. I wasn't equipped or knowledgeable as to what was really happening, why it was happening. I didn't have the information. There wasn't too much information out there. I didn't even know what coaching was at the time either. So I didn't have those resources available to me.
Mm.
But it was after the fact that I started to say, okay, I need to build a support system because it's too isolating. And that's often the challenge women leaders face. They don't have the support system around them to really thrive and to lean on in those challenging times. Long story short, I reached out to a coach. I had my very first coaching session and I thought, wow, this is incredible. I have more insight in the last 60 minutes than I've had in the last 12 months of my own reflection. I can see clearly what's happening with myself right now. And that's what I want to do. And it was kind of that moment where I felt, I have a background in psychology. Nobody told me about coaching when I studied psychology. What a disservice. But it was in that moment I realized this is the path I want to follow. I decided to go and qualify as an executive coach as I was working. Through that, it was really impactful. I was able to really make more of an impact, of course, myself. It's a personal journey, but also within my teams. Long story short, I started my own consulting around leadership development, remote teams, hybrid teams. Quickly noticed the burnout issues I faced. Many organizations and teams face workplace burnout and how to prevent it on a systemic level. Through that research, found out, oh, it's women that are experiencing more burnout and leaving the workplace because of higher levels of stress. That just got me. And really, I thought, okay, I need to really go back to that fire of really supporting women, that passion for me, and build something for them. So it's not to say I just work with women, I work with everyone, but I do have a women's program that has produced incredible results. And the numbers speak for themselves. Companies that invest women into my program, they have a 95% retention rate of those women leaders. Those women that join have an 85% on average of receiving a promotion within 12 months of joining. They reduce their stress levels by 44% in the first 3 months. I've been refining this for years, really understanding what is it going to take for women in leadership to thrive, not just survive. Because it's one thing getting them there. We're diverse in our hiring and empowering our women, but how do we support them in those leadership roles to truly thrive?
Right. I was always impressed by this old photo of Margaret Thatcher. She's standing in front and she's the only woman among these 30 to 50 men behind her. And I was like, man, you have to be so strong to stand, especially during that time when it was more quote unquote a man's world back then.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what your women leaders that are part of your community now, what do they, how does that weight get lifted when they're part of that community? What do they feel? What do they experience?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question because, women are coming into the program, leaders are coming in with different problems, but there's a core kind of theme that's present. And it is number one, how do they shift their leadership, the perception of them, right? And their leadership. So oftentimes women leaders have gotten to a position because they've been masterful doers and, they've been incredible at doing all of the time. Sometimes that's created an over reliance on them, which is leading to stress, which is leading to burnout. Maybe they have some team performance issues at play. Maybe they're lacking some of the confidence that they need to truly advocate for themselves, to advocate for more resources, more support. But when it comes to stress and burnout, it's high performers that are going to experience that more than anybody else. Because the high performer will take on and take on and take on and not actually communicate, their capacity or the fact that they've had to work extra in order to achieve that. And from the outside, it all looks great. It's like that high performer can just keep taking more until they can't.
Right.
So, the women that I work with, some of them are going through that shift of how do they become the visionary, the facilitator of their team and not the executor on their teams. They have to level their teams up, right? They have to level their own skills up, their coaching. Some of them maybe have an overly reliant team where team members are coming to them all the time for questions, for answers, for direction. So they need to create a better sense of ownership on their team. So not just building their own confidence, but their team's confidence too. That's one common theme that comes up with women joining the program. And then the other one is a lot of leaders influence on a different level and become masters of influence and team dynamics, human behavior, the psychology behind the way people behave and think. As a qualified executive coach, my background in psychology, I'm able to bring those tools to the women in my program, supports them in much more impact in their organization to really build that executive presence within themselves and elevate their whole organization. And that's what I will say, Sam, is that the women I work with, they are doing incredible work within their organizations. And it reminds me of the data that companies with women on their executive team are on average 21% more profitable. And women have unique characteristics, strengths, gifts that we bring. And it's not that any one is right or wrong, but it's how do, as women leaders, we support women in understanding those strengths and being able to bring those to the table because they may look different than your male counterpoints. And that's okay. We're designed to work together. So, a lot of the work is helping women understand that zone of genius. Where do they make the most impact? And what's preventing them from being in that zone of genius? What's the busy, noisy work? The heavy work, the work without the big ROI. And how can we alleviate some of that so they can work within that zone of genius?
Back when I started my career, I was in financial services and asset management at some large companies. And as I started seeing women rise in leadership, I knew a lot of them personally. They were my friends. But when they started rising in leadership, they started taking on masculine traits and dressing like men and so forth. And this was a long time ago. I know things have changed now, but how have the expectations of women leadership evolved since then? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I do see that it has evolved in that our workplaces now celebrate diversity. There's more diversity in a lot of the companies I'm exposed to for sure. And there's a definite element of we can be more of ourselves, we can bring more of that authenticity. But at the same time, when you're a leader, that authenticity is a spectrum. And there's some rooms where you can be more yourself, and there's some rooms where you have to play a game. And that's just the reality of it for all of us, men and women. But I do think that, as women, and now even in the face of things like AI and just how fast technology is going and efficiency, and we're so efficient and the speed of everything, I think women's gifts, natural inherent gifts, especially as leaders, are so important right now. If women can create the data around those strengths, like a lot of the women I work with, they're making big impact, but it's through facilitating teams or group coaching or bringing teams together. They're doing more of the emotional intelligent work within the organizations, within the culture. They're making those shifts. And I often say, collect the data. If you can find data on the impact that you're having, we're again balancing those masculine and those feminine traits and being able to communicate from both lenses. So it's important that we're both, but it's important that we don't lose ourselves. If we're continually playing a game and we're completely selling out all of our values, that's what's going to happen. We're going to take on the traits of others. And the other thing, Sam, is finding a community of women who haven't lost that, who haven't lost who they are.
Yeah.
That's so important. I just ran my retreat on Bowen Island for all my clients that come here once a year. There was a real mix of ages, industries, and all of that. There were some younger leaders there, more senior leaders there. Some of the younger women said to me afterwards, it was so inspiring to see women that are mothers, that are great mothers and great leaders at the same time. Because that's given me the insight that I can do that too, and how beautiful is that to have a strong representation of women leaders around that are willing to share both the highs and the lows of that journey. What the environment that we're in is really important so that we do maintain those values and some alignment, although that does fluctuate.
A true believer that sometimes when we get involved in work so much, we forget what's truly important. And a lot of that is our family, our loved ones. I'm really pleased to hear that. I'd like to dive into something else. Many organizations are talking about gender equality. I mean, my job, I'm a compensation professional and I do that multinationally. One of the biggest things right now is the EU Pay Transparency Directive. And that's where we're trying to close the gap between male and female pay. I think we've made a lot of progress over the past few years, but it still exists. Do you believe that there's still a gap that exists in gender fairness in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, the research shows us, as you said, even with compensation, there is still a gap there. And also understanding the gains that we've made is important too. But yeah, I see the gap not just in terms of compensation, but even in terms of resource and support. I'm often working with women to advocate. They come to me to say, I want to join your program. I want this support. I need this support. And, I'm going to pay out of pocket for it. And I say, okay, hold on a minute. Let's actually advocate for you getting this through your organization, because there's a massive ROI. You're doing this on behalf of your work. Yes, you, but also your team, your organization, and look at the ROI that it's going to create for your company. These can be very senior leaders. They can be C-suite, VP level, and they've never had external support from a coach, from a mentor. They've never asked for anything before. I often ask them, do any of your peers have coaching? Yeah, they do. And usually it's the men that have the mentors or the coaches. That's often been the case in some of those conversations. There's a big journey that I'm on with women to be able to build the confidence to advocate for that. I've had clients that have been promoted to the top of their organizations and they've still been resistant to ask for that. But then when I bring them on that journey and I support them with that and how they can ask for that and really articulate the value of it, the majority of the time, thankfully, Sam, the CEO or the leader is like, of course you can. Yes, we would love to invest in you. This sounds brilliant. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's such a win. It's a way for them to see the impact that they're truly making and how valued they are in their organization. So it is a different journey for women to build that confidence and make that ask and see that ask, not just from a need for themselves, because the need is always, how can I support everybody else, right? So at the core for women, knowing that when they're at their best, it impacts everybody else too, right? We have to put on our own oxygen masks first, especially when it comes to supporting a large group of people all the time, coaching them, mentoring them, developing new systems, new processes. Where do you get support?
For sure. And that's one thing I often hear is that women, They often don't advocate for themselves. They often say yes to everything and rarely say no. Is that true?
I do see that quite often. I don't want to make too much of a generalization, but it can definitely be a challenge, especially as women are growing up through leadership and organizations. There is an element of bias that can be at play. So we do have to prove ourselves more in some environments is very important to be able to prove oneself. I think that's the case for a lot of us at the start of our careers. We really have to build that credibility in we know what we're doing, we're able to do this, we're able to handle this. And I definitely personally myself was a yes woman. That served me. It also drained me sometimes, but it served me ultimately. Key to understand at what point do you start building and flexing the not yet. And that comes down to assertiveness, really, Sam, which is an emotional intelligence skill. I also am an emotional intelligence practitioner, so I'll actually do assessments on leaders to support them in understanding that. I often see with women in leadership that they score very high in empathy and interpersonal relationships. And then maybe that assertiveness is a little bit lower. That's where you'll get resistance or reluctance to actually say no or not yet. The great thing about assertiveness is it's a skill. And that means over time it'll get easier and we can develop it and hone it. That no when it needs to be a no. And also coming from understanding people and the psychology of people, I don't think there's ever really a case where we can just say a clear no in the workplace. We want to maintain relationships, we want to be seen as collaborative. So, how do we approach that with different stakeholders? And that's where the mastery really comes in, and a lot of what we cover in our program is what happens when you have to say no to someone that is a really critical stakeholder for you. How do you do that? How do you flex that? And then how do you change the perception if you have always been the yes woman and the yes leader, and that's changing because you want to operate more in your zone of genius? How do you navigate that when you're showing up differently?
Right. Really building that emotional intelligence. So I want to back up to one thing that you mentioned just a few moments ago in your conversation. What is the bias that women are facing nowadays in the workplace? What is the main bias that you are seeing from your women leaders, and how do they navigate that?
Yeah, so there is there's a couple of different bias at play. I think the challenge is not everyone is an ally. Women often have to prove themselves more than their male counterpoints. There's quite a bit of research done on that to say, what do we have to do to be promoted versus what does a man have to do to be promoted? You probably heard of the research, even looking at a job description. If there is a promotion available, a woman will look at it and make sure she ticks off 10 out of 10 versus a male counterpoint may look at it and will apply with a 7 out of 10. So there is an element of having to really prove and build that credibility. How do we continue to build that credibility? Depending on the environment that we're in is important too. Depending on the type of life we have outside of work can also contribute to that. I know a lot of women that I work with are mothers as well, and that can sometimes impact their hours versus their male counterpoint. Maybe don't have to be home for a pickup because their partner is doing it. So
Yeah.
there's lots of different dynamics at play that foster that women that they have to overwork to prove themselves. I see it time and time again for a number of reasons.
I think one thing we've witnessed years ago during the pandemic, the onset of more remote work and hybrid work, I'm sure that's opened some doors, but also blurred some boundaries. And what are your women leaders seeing here?
Mhm. In general, I think for everyone working remotely, there's quite a few challenges. Boundaries for sure, isolation. The big thing for women leaders is how do you influence when you work remotely? Or if you're one of the only that work, or you're influencing across time zones or cultures, which many people are. So again, coming back to the psychology and understanding, okay, how do I do that and make sure that my work is visible? That's a big challenge for everyone that's working remotely, but especially the women I'm working with that are trying to create more visibility, trying to create more influence when they're not necessarily there in person. So I think there's an element of being more strategic, being more deliberate with that, and intentional, and really kind of doing some stakeholder mapping to understand how we're going to build that influence remotely. And then, of course, the boundaries. I think that comes back to mastery of self. How do you master yourself and the home responsibilities, the life responsibilities, which all of us face? But How do you do that? And that can be a challenge at different stages and seasons of our life. Kids, different stages, family, aging parents, we're all experienced to the different ebbs and flows of life. Remote working can be really helpful for that. It can be a real game changer in that regard. I know that's been the case for a lot of the women that I work with.
Well, it's all quite a balance for sure. But here's one thing that we're all facing. The way of work is changing dramatically right now. With the onset of AI and automation reshaping a lot of jobs, how can women place themselves as leaders in the next era of work?
Great question. I think for everyone, it's understanding AI isn't going anywhere. I've had my own journey with AI where used it, loved it, and thought, oh no, I want to step away from AI. I don't want to use it. And then I realized I'm falling behind if I don't use it. I'd be anti-AI, or I can be, but how is that going to affect
Right.
my business, the team's performance, all of those things? So number one, how do we use it in a very ethical way? And how do we align it to our values? What does that look like? Number two, what's the reward? What's the opportunity here? It provide everyone an opportunity to look at what's the work I really want to be doing? Where do I shine the most? Where do I bring in the most impact, the most ROI? What gives me the highest levels of satisfaction? And how can I leverage technology to support me in doing more of that? And how can I leverage AI to take some of that lower satisfaction work away from me, away from the team? So I think that's a big opportunity in general, but then also looking for women in leadership, particularly, where is it that AI just cannot replace you?
Hmm.
That's a great question. Where is it that AI just cannot replace what you bring to the table? Hone and master that more than anything else. Use that, leverage that, talk about that, share your zone of genius in the right places and say, hey, I have some suggestions. My area of expertise is this. Would this be helpful for your project? Build that confidence because there's so much that we do as humans that AI can just never replace. And AI is going to cause even more challenges with information overload and accessibility all of the time. As humans, we don't process information that quickly. You know, our systems, our nervous systems are completely overloaded. A lot of the women I'm working with are working with the nervous systems of their team. They are masterful coaches, facilitating, they are supporting the team and all this knowing of information into the doing. That's where we focus on in the next chapter. I think it's a very exciting time for women in leadership because that's where they naturally excel.
Yes, yes. I've been telling a lot of the leaders I'm working with that we should be evaluating all of the workflows in our space and finding those areas that can be automated and can take pressure off the team to where we can be more strategic and really enhance and make sure that we're heard and where we can be strategic and show that. So I think that's super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny, outside of AI, it's still robotic, but I have a big golden retriever at home and he's just so hairy and I would have to vacuum the floors nearly twice a day sometimes, honestly, which probably took maybe 40 minutes of my time. We recently got a RoboVac and it goes around twice a day around the whole house. I vacuum once a week now. So I've saved hours every week by this new process we've implemented in our household. And I remember the first couple of weeks, I said, what am I going to do with this time? How am I going to use it? I can work out more. I can do some deep work instead. So what's the ROI of that? And then once I had that, I thought, oh my gosh, what else am I missing? What else can I streamline in my life? Save me so much time and headaches and create more space for me. So I love that you're getting everyone to think about that. And I 100% agree with that.
So that's a great example of how technology can free a person up to do higher level work. Are you learning about other ways that the women leaders are using technology to amplify their influence to be more visible among their teams?
Great question. I don't know right now any kind of amazing, innovative ones that we don't already know, right? Pieces like note taking. Actually, so many women that I know in leadership were taking the notes in meetings. You know, they're not doing it now. They're adding the Geminis or the Phantoms or whatever it is, or the Zoom AI, and that's all there. So saving them a huge amount of time. And from that sense, emails, all of those administrative works, that's all being put towards AI now, which is a massive unload of the mental load that we carry.
Yes,
Yeah.
another great example. So tell me, we've been talking about women in community and so forth, but what place do women leaders play in mentorship?
Incredibly important. We have to talk about women supporting other women. And I always say, are you a lifter? Are you a genuine lifter of other women? Are you a drainer? Are you a stamper honor? Do you stamp on other women? And that's often the challenge, right? It's how do we find women that are genuinely wanting to mentor other women? I'm grateful that the women that I attract and allow lifters into the work that I do. Every single woman I work with is a lifter. They're going through the program, sharing the results, and bringing other women leaders into the program. They're genuinely supporting one another, advocating for the promotion of one another. They're spending time together. They're setting up ERGs within their organizations and inviting women to it. And they're advocating for budget to get me in to do a training session on building confidence and executive presence. These are the true lifters of our generation. And it's so incredibly exciting and important. I have been at both ends of that. I have had massive breakthroughs in my career because of other women, and I have had massive letdowns because of other women as well. We get to choose who we want to be in that and what our relationship to other women is. We have an opportunity to build healthier relationships with one another. It's not a competitive environment, it's not a competitive system. Years ago, maybe it was because there were fewer opportunities and maybe some women kind of carry that with them that, look, I had to fight for my place, you have to fight for yours. But I do believe that story is changing and that energy is changing. I don't see it with this generation of upcoming women leaders. They genuinely are there to say, let's go together. If we want to go fast, go alone. If we want to go far, we go together.
That's excellent. So to kind of dig into that a little bit more, I know that in your program you have leaders of all ages, but when you look at the next generation of young women leaders, what gives you hope? What gets you excited about that next generation?
Oh, I mean, how our relationship, I think even looking at the generational differences of our workplace and older generations, how they had to come to work and the sacrifices that they had to make and how much of themselves they couldn't bring to work versus our generation. I'm a millennium. We could bring more of ourselves to the workplace, which I think really supported conversations that we're having now, like well-being, workplace well-being, stress reduction. We're more aware of not just performance, but what it takes to drive sustainable high performance of human beings. And then we have the next generation coming in with a whole new set of values. They're often told, bring your whole self to work. We've all been told different things about the workplace. The upcoming generation of leaders are able to see all of that at once. We're working now at a point where we have so many generations working together, and those leaders are holding all of that at once. They're aware of all the pieces in the system. They have exposure to remote working, hybrid, time zone, different cultures. That exposure is leading to mastery of knowledge, facilitation, and exceptional leaders that are very capable.
Oh, this has been a great conversation, Shauna. I've been really enjoying this. If you can leave one message for a woman out there aspiring to lead and thrive, what would that be?
One message would be, what do you need right now to make your next level of impact in your work and leadership? And I would think about what's the benefit to your team, to your organization, to your industry, if you get that need met. And then what's the benefit to you too? That's important, of course. But if you can see it from how do my needs support the work that I'm trying to do and the impact I'm trying to create, you're going to feel more confident in advocating for that need, whether it's an extra person on your team, more resources, more responsibility, coaching, whatever it is, when you see the ripple impact of your need being met.
Great, very wise. So Shauna, I know that there's many listeners out there that are wondering more about your program, and I know that you have your book, Managing Employee Burnout. But how can people learn more about this topic and learn more about your program, the Impact Amplification Program?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sam. I mean, connect with me on LinkedIn, Shauna Moran. I post a lot of content there. You can sign up to my newsletter, shaunamoran.com/newsletter, or just head to my website. You'll see my Impact Amplification Program there with all of the research results on shaunamoran.com.
Well, thanks once again, Shauna, for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it, Sam.
Is for all our listeners out there, if today's conversation has inspired you, follow us on LinkedIn. We're also on YouTube and different podcast platforms. Make sure you like and subscribe and keep building those workplaces where everybody thrives and exceeds. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum. All right. Take care.